Have you ever felt that the more you understand the world, the harder it becomes to belong to it? That, by clearly seeing the emptiness of social conventions, the vanity games, and the repetitive cycles of the people around you, you become almost a stranger in your own reality. There is a pain in being lucid in a world that prefers comfortable repetition over deep reflection, and that pain often manifests as rejection. Being intelligent may seem, at first glance, like an undeniable advantage, but in practice, those who dare to think beyond common sense face resistance from society. For Arthur Schopenhauer, the greater an individual's intelligence, the greater their solitude. But why? What is so threatening about someone who thinks too much? Have you noticed how sometimes, the more you understand things, the harder it becomes to talk to people? As if seeing too much creates an invisible barrier. And that's where the paradox begins. Because they taught you that being intelligent was a virtue, but no one warned you that it could isolate you. That your ability to observe, to question, to see beyond the surface, would make you strange, unsettling, a presence that reveals what others prefer to hide. Maybe you've tried to fit in, hide what you think, laugh when you didn't find it funny, pretend you didn't see the absurdity around you, and still, the feeling of not belonging persists. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the pain you feel is a sign that you're seeing something most people refuse to see? Maybe society doesn't hate intelligence. Maybe it fears the mirror it represents. Think about it. What happens when the light of consciousness illuminates a world made of shadows? Being intelligent seems, at first, like a blessing. From an early age, those who show a sharp mind receive praise. You're different. You're brilliant. But, over time, that praise turns into pressure, and worse, into distance. The mind that sees too much starts to notice things others don't see or don't want to see. It begins to ask uncomfortable questions, to perceive contradictions, to dismantle illusions, to distrust collective certainties. And that has a price. How many times have you held back an idea to avoid seeming arrogant? How many times have you felt the need to downplay yourself so as not to scare others? The truth is that intelligence can become a burden when it finds no space to be shared. Intelligence, when not accompanied by empathy or when it doesn't find a receptive environment, generates a kind of exile, an isolation disguised as independence. And the more you understand the world, the less you can be a part of it. And that's where the pain begins. It's not just physical solitude, it's existential solitude. A feeling of being out of place, not because you chose to be, but because you can't pretend you don't see. This feeling has been described by many thinkers, but few were as direct as Schopenhauer. For him, the truly intelligent man inevitably ends up distancing himself from the crowd, not out of arrogance, but due to incompatibility, because his mind is occupied with deeper matters, while the world revolves around superficialities. And this isn't something you choose, it's something you realize. The burden of being intelligent lies in having to carry a lucidity that cannot be shared, in living in a world that values the appearance of intelligence but rejects its depth. It's like trying to offer silence amidst the noise, clarity where everyone prefers fog. But there's beauty in that too. Because this pain is not a punishment, it's a calling, an invitation to walk a less obvious path, to find your own voice, even if it echoes into the void before being heard. Do you feel this weight? Then maybe, just maybe, you're more awake than you think. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't write to please. He wrote as someone who needed to get something off his chest. And perhaps that's why, even today, his words speak directly to those who carry this strange sense of displacement in the world. For him, intelligence wasn't a ladder to success, but an abyss. The more one sees, the less one wants to participate. The more one understands, the less one accepts. Schopenhauer observed life with an unrelenting gaze. He said the world was driven by a blind force, an irrational will that pushes us toward competition, suffering, endless desires. In this scenario, the intelligent person isn't privileged, but someone who suffers in silence for perceiving illusion where others see meaning. He compared the human being to someone awake among sleepwalkers. One who awakens to the true nature of existence begins to see the absurdity of certain races, the emptiness of certain goals, the tragic comedy of so many relationships. This doesn't generate admiration, it generates discomfort, because seeing too much is dangerous to the system. It's like turning on the light in a ballroom where everyone is dancing in the dark. No one says thank you, everyone gets annoyed. The consequence? The thinker becomes a foreign body, is labeled a pessimist, complicated, distant, when, in reality, maybe they've just stopped believing in the fantasies that fueled the everyday life of the majority. Schopenhauer felt this firsthand. He lived in isolation, was ignored by his contemporaries, and only had his work recognized later when the pain he described began to resonate with other generations. He didn't seek success or applause. He wrote for those who had already felt, even vaguely, that same restlessness. And that's why his ideas still echo. Because those who live the pain of seeing too much, even without knowing philosophy, feel in their bones what he described with words. The weariness in the face of superficiality, the discomfort with the repetition of patterns, the exhaustion of seeming strange for speaking truths that are too simple. Schopenhauer doesn't romanticize this pain, but he doesn't treat it as a curse either. For him, consciousness is an inevitable burden for those who think deeply. The price of lucidity is high, but ignorance, he said, charges an even higher price, only in invisible installments. Frustration, resentment, lives wasted trying to fit into roles that make no sense. Seeing too much is painful, but it's also the first step toward stopping the repetition, stopping the pretending, finally beginning to live with some truth, even if it means walking alone. There is an invisible force that pushes everyone to the center, to consensus, to the safety of shared ideas, even if they are shallow or incoherent. Society functions like an organism that needs stability, and anything that threatens this stability is instinctively fought off. Those who think outside the crowd aren't just strange, they're a threat. Thinking differently, in this context, isn't seen as courage, but as deviation. The majority doesn't want depth, it wants predictability. And as much as there is a beautiful discourse about originality and critical thinking, in practice, it's unsettling. Questioning the obvious creates tension. Revealing what's behind the facade causes discomfort. The intelligent person who refuses to repeat the same formulas starts being avoided, first with silence, then with irony, later with direct rejection. Society tends to neutralize what it can't control, and intelligence doesn't submit, doesn't fit in, doesn't sell out. There's a quote from Nietzsche that helps explain this. He said, "And those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." That's it. Those who see differently seem crazy to those who've never dared to look beyond the surface. And it's easier to call them arrogant, difficult, unbearable, than to face the discomfort that lucidity brings. Society doesn't hate intelligence itself. It hates what intelligence unmasks, the illusions that sustain the collective, the lies everyone repeats to survive the boredom, the fear, the sense of emptiness. When someone begins to break away from that, it's as if they're silently saying, "You're pretending," and no one likes to be reminded of that. That's why the intelligent are often forced to choose, either pretend not to see and fit in, or pay the price for continuing to see. It's not an easy choice. Many fall ill in the process, develop anxiety, depression, or live with a constant feeling of inadequacy. Others shut down, creating a cocoon where they can exist without constantly trimming themselves down. But there are also those who turn that rejection into strength, who understand that the pain of not belonging can be the beginning of true freedom. Because, deep down, those who think outside the crowd are freeing themselves from the invisible bars of conformity. Being rejected for thinking differently isn't failure. It's a symptom of awakening, a sign that consciousness is surpassing the limits of what it was programmed to accept. It's uncomfortable, it's lonely, but it's also necessary. Because it is precisely the refusal to stay silent that plants seeds in dormant soil, even if no one notices now, even if it takes time. Those who think outside the crowd have, deep down, already begun walking out of the cave. There is a kind of solitude that doesn't arise from the absence of people, but from the absence of being heard. Those who see beyond, who feel too much, who connect the dots that others don't even notice, end up living in a parallel world. They are there, physically present, but emotionally isolated. Have you ever tried to share an idea that seemed obvious to you, only to be met with silence or a puzzled look? Have you ever had to swallow your thoughts so you wouldn't ruin the mood? This is the reality for many people who think deeply, not by choice, but by nature. People who pick up on the nuances of conversations, feel the weight of unspoken gestures, notice the superficiality of connections, and the more they perceive, the harder it becomes to participate in this social game that seems to revolve around appearances, canned jokes, and endless distractions. The misunderstanding starts early. More sensitive, observant children are often seen as complicated, too demanding, or intense. In adulthood, these become labels: antisocial, cold, arrogant, dramatic, when in fact, the root lies in a level of perception that goes beyond the ordinary, and that hurts. Because every human being desires connection, but the thinker often finds themselves surrounded by shallow relationships, interrupted dialogues, rushed advice. They are not heard, they are interpreted, and almost always misinterpreted. Contempt often comes disguised. Someone who mocks your ideas, a colleague who avoids serious conversations, a relative who calls you radical for questioning the norm. Gradually, the individual starts to fall silent, not out of cowardice, but out of exhaustion. Speaking becomes useless, and silence becomes a shield. But the problem isn't just the world that won't listen. It's the risk of starting to believe there's something wrong with you, of internalizing the contempt, of thinking it would be easier not to feel so much, not to think so much, not to see so much. That's the trap, because it's at that point that many people lose themselves. They start to prune, to mold, to reduce their own intensity just to fit into small spaces. But the truth is, this solitude doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means you're perceiving something that the majority hasn't yet named. Great thinkers, artists, therapists, philosophers, nearly all went through this inner exile, because before they could reach others, they had to learn to sustain their own voice in the void. The solitude of those who see beyond doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a sacred space. an incubation time, a fertile silence where true autonomy is born. Don't give up on yourself for not being understood. Maybe you're saying what the world hasn't yet learned to hear. Not every criticism is about you. Sometimes, what someone says reveals much more about their own limitations than about your choices. Intelligence, when it's genuine and free, provokes, and not always because of the content itself, but because of what it awakens in others. Insecurity, comparison, frustration. That's where one of the most subtle and dangerous mechanisms of human interaction comes in. Envy disguised as criticism. It's common for someone feeling inferior to project that as judgment. But that judgment comes camouflaged. No one says your intelligence bothers me. Instead, they say you're arrogant, pretentious, difficult to deal with. The criticism acts as a shield for their internal discomfort. It's a way of trying to diminish what they can't reach or don't want to face within themselves. This kind of reaction isn't just individual, it's a collective reflection. Society, to remain cohesive, creates an ideal of normality that everyone must follow. And when someone starts to stand out by thinking outside that model, the masses react. Not to protect the individual, but to preserve the comfort of the majority. Envy is in the sideways glances, the poisoned jokes, the attempts to put you in your place, not because you were wrong, but because you were too right, and that exposed the mediocrity around you. It's important to understand, not every rejection comes from a mistake of yours. Often, it's the reflection of a pain you activated in someone else. Your freedom might remind someone of their own prison. Your lucidity might lay bare someone else's denial. And in that case, the automatic response will be to attack, criticize, ridicule. But there's a delicate point here, the risk of becoming bitter because of it, of using your intelligence as a wall, as a defense, as revenge against the world that didn't understand you. That's a common and dangerous detour, because it turns lucidity into resentment. Maturity lies in recognizing the game, but not playing it the same way. In knowing that the criticism may be rooted in envy, but without needing to respond with contempt. The true strength of the thinker isn't improving anything. It's in staying true to what they know, even when that's not validated. Those who think deeply must learn to live with these reactions, without bowing to them, but also without letting the heart harden. Because, deep down, these criticisms reveal the impact of your presence. If you feel this in your daily life, maybe you're touching on things others aren't ready to face, and just the fact that you keep being who you are is already an act of courage. Not all pain has to be an end. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a turning point. Rejection, as harsh as it may be, can become a filter separating who you really are from who others expected you to be. And in that process, the authentic thinker is born. Authenticity isn't about shouting truths to the world. It's about holding on to them, even in silence. When you start to accept that you may never be fully understood by everyone, the need for approval gives way to integrity. And little by little, what once hurt as rejection begins to feel like freedom. Transforming that pain into strength requires first a decision to stop bargaining away your lucidity in order to feel accepted. This doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world, but choosing more carefully where you invest your energy. Not every environment deserves your depth. Not every conversation deserves your full presence. Learn to observe, to turn restlessness into reflection, to use discomfort as a drive to go deeper, not as a reason to shut down. And once you start living this way, you'll understand the world with greater clarity. Yes, there will still be sideways glances, veiled criticism, uncomfortable silences. But amid it all, you'll have the peace of someone who knows who they are. The calm of not needing to be explained. True strength is born when you begin to walk lightly, even knowing not everyone will keep up. Sometimes, all someone needs is a space where they can simply be, to think, feel, observe, without having to justify themselves. And when that space doesn't exist on the outside, it needs to be built from within. There comes a time when the search for belonging becomes exhausting, and what once felt like pain becomes a standard. You start to choose more calmly, speak less, observe more. You learn not to waste your presence in places where there is no listening. Those who perceive too much live with a certain tension in their chest, a kind of restlessness that few understand. But there's beauty in that, because that sensitivity, as hard as it may be, is also what keeps you alive, what keeps you from getting lost in the noise. It's not about isolating yourself. It's about preserving yourself. It's about understanding that not everyone will keep your pace, and that's okay. You're not here to please. You're here to live truthfully, and that, in itself, is already an act of courage. Keep thinking, keep feeling, but above all, keep going. Because even if the world still doesn't know what to do with your intensity, it has a place. And that place begins when you stop molding yourself and start listening to yourself. If you enjoyed this content and want to explore more about life's questions, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who is also one of the awakened.